had a secret, a huge one locked away behind a brand new front door. For 6 long years I'd sacrificed, saved, and dreamed of this moment. But as I stood in my very own duplex, a property I bought with my own sweat and tears, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. My family wasn't just planning to visit my new home. They were planning for my brother and his entire family to move into it, rent-free. The only problem? They hadn't bothered to ask me. I am 32 years old and a financial advisor in Boston. For 6 years I saved every extra penny for my dream of owning property. When I finally bought a duplex last spring, I decided to keep it quiet from my family. That decision turned out to be wiser than I knew. One Sunday dinner, I overheard my parents planning for my brother Kevin and his entire family to move into my new place rent-free without even asking me. Before I tell you how this all unfolded, take a second to let me know where you are watching from, and subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself when family takes advantage. Growing up in my family, there was always an unspoken rule that I was expected to help others, especially family. My parents, Martha and Frank, raised us with the value that family comes first, but somehow that burden seemed to fall more heavily on my shoulders than on my older brother, Kevin. I love my family deeply, but over the years, a pattern developed that I was only beginning to recognize. Kevin, now 36, had always been the charming one, quick with jokes and stories. He was also notoriously bad with money. By 25, he had racked up credit card debt, buying a motorcycle and taking expensive vacations. By 30, he had borrowed money from our parents for a business venture that failed within 6 months. Each time, the family rallied around him, offering financial support and emotional comfort. I was always expected to contribute, either by lending money I had carefully saved or by offering free child care for his 3 kids. His current situation was particularly dire. 8 months ago, Kevin lost his job at a marketing firm after the company downsized. His wife Sarah, a part-time teacher, was not making enough to cover their expenses. They had 3 children: Liam, age 10, Sophie, age 8, and Ethan, age 5. Their landlord had recently increased their rent, and they were struggling to make ends meet. Meanwhile, I had been working diligently toward financial independence. After completing my MBA 7 years ago, I secured a position as a financial advisor at a reputable firm in Boston. The irony was not lost on me that I helped others manage their money while my own brother seemed incapable of doing the same. I lived frugally in a small 1-bedroom apartment, brought lunch to work every day, and limited unnecessary expenses. Every month, I put aside 30% of my income toward my goal of property ownership. When I reached my savings goal earlier this year, I began researching real estate investments. A duplex seemed like the perfect option. I could live in one unit and rent out the other to help cover the mortgage. After months of searching, I found a charming brick duplex in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. It needed some cosmetic updates but was structurally sound, and the price was within my budget. I worked with a real estate agent who helped me navigate the purchasing process. The closing date was set, and as the day approached, I felt a growing excitement mixed with anxiety. This was by far the largest purchase of my life, and I was doing it alone. I decided not to tell my family until after everything was finalized, partly because I wanted to surprise them, but also because I feared they might find a way to make this milestone about Kevin and his needs. The day I signed the final paperwork and received the keys was exhilarating. Standing alone in the empty duplex, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. Each unit had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a cozy living room, and a functional kitchen. The backyard was small but well-maintained, with a maple tree providing shade for summer afternoons. I took photos of every room, planning renovations and decorating ideas. Over the next week, I arranged for utilities to be connected and scheduled a cleaning service to prepare both units. I researched rental rates in the area and created a listing for the second unit. My plan was to move into one side within the month and have a tenant in place for the other unit shortly thereafter. The rental income would cover about 60% of my monthly mortgage payment, making the investment even more financially sound. I contacted a few friends to help me move some of my furniture into the unit I planned to occupy. We spent a Saturday painting the living room and kitchen in soft neutral tones. By the end of the day, with pizza boxes empty on the new countertops and paint smudges on our clothes, I felt a sense of ownership and accomplishment unlike anything I had experienced before. Little did I know that my carefully laid plans were about to collide with my family dynamics in a way I could never have anticipated. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' suburban home for our regular family dinner, excited to finally share my news. I had decided this was the perfect time to announce my property purchase. I imagined my parents' proud faces and perhaps a touch of surprise that their daughter had accomplished this milestone on her own. I had even prepared a small speech and brought a bottle of champagne to celebrate. I arrived early to help my mother with dinner preparations, as was our custom. The aroma of pot roast filled the house and my father was watching a baseball game in the living room. I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when I heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of my brother Kevin, his wife Sarah, and their 3 children entering. My mother wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet them, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I continued preparing the salad, half listening to the greetings and chatter coming from the front hall. After a few minutes, I realized that my parents, Kevin and Sarah, had moved to my father's study adjacent to the kitchen. Their voices were lowered, but in the quiet house, their words carried through the thin wall. I heard my father say, "It's the perfect solution. G has all this extra space now." My hands froze, knife hovering over a cucumber. Extra space. They could not possibly know about my duplex. I hadn't told anyone in my family yet. My mother's voice chimed in. "She always helps family. That's how we raised her." Kevin responded. "It would be such a relief, especially for the kids. They need stability right now." Then Sarah added, "I was thinking we could put the boys in one bedroom and Sophie in the other. The living room in their side is bigger than ours, right?" Their side. My heart began to race as I pieced together what was happening. Somehow they knew about my duplex and they had already made plans for Kevin's family to move in without even consulting me. I remained frozen in place, straining to hear more of their conversation. "Frank, do you think she'll want us to help her move her things to make room?" my mother asked. "No need, Martha," Kevin replied instead of my father. "She hardly has any furniture in that apartment of hers. Always saving money instead of living a little." I heard Sarah's laugh followed by, "Well, we'll help her decorate. I have so many ideas for making that place feel like a real home." My cheeks burned with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Not only had they discovered my purchase, but they had already decided that Kevin's family would be moving into the second unit without even asking me. And from the sounds of it, they expected them to live there rent-free. I forced myself to continue chopping vegetables as my mind raced. How did they find out? Perhaps they had seen my name in property records, or maybe one of my parents' friends had spotted me at the property and mentioned it. Regardless of how they knew, their presumption was staggering. When we finally sat down for dinner, I waited for them to bring it up, curious to see how they would present this plan to me. After the food was served and we had exchanged the usual pleasantries, my father cleared his throat. "Gee," he began, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We have some wonderful news. We have found the perfect solution to Kevin's housing problem." I took a sip of water, avoiding eye contact with anyone at the table. My mother continued, "We know about your duplex, sweetheart. Mrs. Johnson from church saw you there last week and mentioned it to me. We are so proud of you for taking such a big step." Before I could respond, Kevin jumped in. "And it's such perfect timing, sis. With our rent situation and the kids' school being so close to your new place, it just makes sense for us to take the other unit." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "We promise to be the perfect neighbors. The kids are so excited about living close to their Aunt G." I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my excited agreement. The expectation in the room was palpable. Of course I would say yes. When had I ever said no to my family? Kevin's children were watching me with hopeful expressions. Liam, the oldest, said, "Mom says we can walk to school from the new house, and you can help me with my math homework whenever I need it." I forced a smile, unable to disappoint the children in that moment. The adults at the table took my smile as agreement, and the conversation quickly turned to moving logistics. My mother started planning. "We can help you move your things next weekend, and then Kevin and Sarah can start bringing their things over the following week." Kevin added, The timing is perfect since our lease is up at the end of the month. And without rent to pay, we can finally start getting ahead financially. The assumption that they would live there rent-free was now stated explicitly. Not a single person at the table seemed to think this was an extraordinary request. No one asked how this might affect my mortgage payments or my financial plans. No one considered that I might have my own plans for the property I had worked so hard to purchase. Instead of confronting them then and there, I stayed quiet, nodding occasionally and pushing food around my plate. A lifetime of being the family peacekeeper held me back from causing a scene. But inside something had shifted. A boundary had been crossed that I could not ignore. The drive home that evening was a blur of conflicting emotions. Memories flooded back of all the times I had set aside my own needs to help my family, particularly Kevin. The summer vacation I canceled to loan him money for car repairs. The weekends I spent babysitting so he and Sarah could have date nights. The countless times I had been expected to pick up the slack because I was single and supposedly had fewer responsibilities. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, I made a decision. This time would be different. This time I would put myself first. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Sitting at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, I pulled out a notebook and began listing all the times my family had taken advantage of my generosity without reciprocation. The list grew quickly, filling the page with incidents dating back to my college years. There was the time I worked 2 jobs to pay my way through undergrad while my parents paid Kevin's full tuition, justifying it because he wasn't as academically inclined as I was and needed more support. There were the 3 separate occasions when Kevin had borrowed money from me with vague promises to pay it back someday. The Christmas when my parents suggested I buy the expensive gaming console for all the kids since I didn't have children of my own to spend money on. The pattern was clear and long-standing. I had been conditioned to be the family safety net, the responsible one who would always sacrifice for others. But what struck me most was the complete lack of consideration for my own goals and dreams. Not once during the previous night's dinner had anyone asked what my plans were for the duplex. The assumption was that my property, my investment, was a family resource to be allocated according to their needs. I called my closest friend, Taylor, who had helped me move some furniture into the duplex. When I explained the situation, her outrage on my behalf was validating. "Gee, that's absolutely ridiculous," she exclaimed. "You saved for years for this. It's your investment, your future. They can't just decide to move in without even asking you, let alone expect to live there for free." "But they are family," I said, playing devil's advocate against my own interests out of habit. "And Kevin does have the kids to think about, Taylor. Being family doesn't give them the right to take advantage of you. Would Kevin do the same for you if the situations were reversed?" We both knew the answer to that question. Kevin had never demonstrated the same level of sacrifice or consideration for me that was constantly expected in the other direction. "You need to set boundaries, G," Taylor continued. "If you let them move in now, especially rent-free, you'll never get them out, and your investment will become a financial burden instead of the asset you worked so hard for." She was right, and deep down I knew it. After our call, I made another decision. I would not confront my family directly yet, but I would move forward with my original plan for the duplex. In fact, I would accelerate it. That afternoon, I contacted 3 property management companies and scheduled consultations for the following day. By Tuesday evening, I had signed a contract with Cornerstone Property Management, a well-established firm with excellent reviews. The manager, David, assured me they could find qualified tenants quickly, especially given the desirable location of my duplex. I decided to rent out both units rather than live in one myself. This would maximize my rental income and create a clean break from the family expectations. I could find a small apartment closer to my office, reducing my commute time and creating more separation between my personal and family life. By Friday, Cornerstone had already lined up several potential tenants for viewings. I took a day off work to meet with David and prepare both units for showing. We discussed rental rates, lease terms, and tenant requirements. Given the current market and location, he suggested a 12-month lease with rent slightly above what I had initially calculated, which would cover nearly 75% of my mortgage. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. While dodging calls and texts from my family about moving plans, I was secretly meeting potential tenants, reviewing applications, and preparing lease agreements. I avoided Sunday dinner by claiming I had to work on an urgent client project, buying myself more time. By the end of that week, I had signed lease agreements with 2 separate tenants, both with excellent credit scores and stable employment. The unit, initially intended for my own use, would be occupied by a young professional couple, Michael and Lisa, who both worked at a nearby hospital. The second unit, ironically the one my family had mentally assigned to Kevin and Sarah, would be rented by a retired professor, Dr. Eleanor Wilson, who wanted to downsize from her large home after her husband passed away. Both leases would begin on the 1st of the following month, just 2 weeks away. The timing was tight but manageable. I arranged for professional cleaners to do a final pass through both units and scheduled time for the property manager to do the move-in inspections with each tenant. Meanwhile, I found a small but modern 1-bedroom apartment in a building just 3 blocks from my office. The rent was higher than I had hoped, but the convenience and proximity to work made it worthwhile. Plus, with the rental income from both duplex units, my overall housing expenses would still be lower than before. I signed a 6-month lease on the apartment and arranged for my furniture to be moved the following weekend. I told only Taylor and 2 other close friends about my new address, swearing them to secrecy. I would tell my family eventually, of course, but not until after both duplex units were occupied and it was too late for them to change my plans. The guilt was considerable, especially when Kevin called to ask if I needed help packing up my apartment. I gave vague responses about not being ready yet and having everything under control. When my mother texted about coming over to measure for curtains in what would be Kevin's side, I replied that I was still dealing with paperwork and would let them know when the time was right. As move-in day approached for my new tenants, the calls and texts from my family became more frequent and insistent. Sarah sent links to furniture she thought would look nice in my unit. My father called to discuss helping with moving costs for Kevin. My mother left voicemails about organizing a housewarming party for all of us. Each message increased my anxiety, but also strengthened my resolve. The pattern was so clear now. My family making plans for my life, my resources, my future without consulting me. Always assuming I would go along with whatever they decided was best, even when it primarily benefited Kevin at my expense. The weekend before the tenants were scheduled to move in, I successfully relocated to my new apartment. I changed my mailing address, updated my information with the bank and utility companies, and settled into my new, smaller space. It was cozy and convenient, with a small balcony overlooking a courtyard and modern appliances that made the compact kitchen feel luxurious. As I unpacked my belongings, I felt a mixture of emotions. Guilt about the inevitable confrontation to come, anxiety about standing up to my family for perhaps the first time, but also a growing sense of pride and independence. I was taking control of my life and my financial future in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The final piece of my plan fell into place when David from the property management company called to confirm that both sets of tenants would be moving in that Saturday. Everything was ready. All I had to do now was wait for the storm that would surely follow. The week leading up to move-in day was tense. My brother Kevin texted me daily, asking when they could start bringing boxes over to the duplex. "Hey sis, can we drop off some of the kids' stuff this weekend? Sarah has already packed up their rooms," he wrote on Monday. I replied several hours later, still finalizing some things with the property. "I'll let you know soon." On Tuesday, my mother called while I was at work. I let it go to voicemail and listened to her message during my lunch break. "Gee, sweetheart, I picked up some lovely curtains for your living room. They were on sale at Macy's. I thought we could hang them this weekend when we help you get settled. Call me back when you can." I texted a brief response. "Thanks, Mom, but I'm still sorting things out. Might need to postpone a bit." By Wednesday, my father had joined the campaign. His text was more direct. "Kevin needs to give notice to his landlord by Friday. When can they start moving their things to your place?" This required a more substantial response, so I called him after work, careful to keep my tone casual. "Dad, I understand Kevin is anxious to get moving, but there are still some repairs and paperwork I need to take care of before anyone can move in. He'll have a better timeline next week." His frustration was evident. "Gee, they need to make decisions now. Their landlord is already showing their apartment to new tenants. We can't leave them without a place to live. I understand, Dad, I replied, keeping my voice steady. But I need to make sure everything is properly set up first. You'll figure it out and let everyone know soon. Thursday brought an unexpected visit from Kevin to my office. I was in a meeting with a client when the receptionist informed me my brother was waiting in the lobby. I excused myself briefly to speak with him. Kevin looked agitated, running his hand through his hair as he paced the small reception area. When he saw me, he immediately launched into his concerns. Gee, we need to talk about move-in dates. Sarah's freaking out because we have to be out of our place by the end of the month, and you keep putting us off about when we can move into the duplex. I glanced around, aware of the receptionist pretending not to listen. This was not the place for this conversation. Kevin, I'm with a client right now, I said in a low voice. And this isn't something we should discuss at my workplace. Well, you don't answer your phone or respond to texts with actual information. So what am I supposed to do? He replied, his voice rising slightly. I took a deep breath. I have things under control. There are some issues with the property that I'm handling. You'll have more information by the weekend. I promise. This seemed to placate him temporarily, though his expression remained doubtful. As he turned to leave, he added, Oh, and Sarah wanted to know if you have a preference on paint colors for the kids' rooms. She's thinking light blue for the boys and lavender for Sophie. The assumption that they would be redecorating my property irritated me, but I maintained my composure. We'll talk about all of that later, I said, already turning back toward my meeting room. That evening, I received an email from Sarah with the subject line, Duplex decorating ideas. Attached were Pinterest boards for each room of what she clearly considered their unit, along with links to furniture and decor items she planned to purchase. The email ended with, Let me know what you think. Also, do you mind if we paint the kitchen cabinets white? The current color is a bit dark for my taste. I closed the email without responding, my resolve strengthening with each presumptuous communication. Friday brought the most difficult interaction yet. My mother called just as I was leaving work. Gee, your father and I want to come over tomorrow morning to help you set up your place. Then we can get Kevin's side ready too. They need to start moving in this weekend. The urgency in her voice made it clear they had reached the limit of their patience with my delays. I knew I could not put them off any longer without revealing my plan. Mom, I have some errands to run tomorrow morning, I said carefully. How about we talk about this on Sunday at dinner? There was a pause before she responded. Is everything okay, G? You've been so evasive lately. If there's a problem with the duplex, you know we can help. Your father is good with repairs, and I'm sure whatever is wrong can be fixed before Kevin and his family move in. The concern in her voice was genuine, making what I was doing feel even more deceptive. But I reminded myself of the years of one-sided expectations and held firm. Everything is fine, Mom. We'll explain everything on Sunday. I promise. After hanging up, I received a text from Kevin. Parents said you're being weird about move-in. What's going on? We need to get out of our place ASAP. Landlord is being a jerk. This was followed by another. Also, Sarah wants to know if we can get the measurements for the bedrooms, so we can make sure our furniture will fit. And then, almost forgot. Can you chip in for the moving truck? Kind of tight on cash right now, but should be able to pay you back next month. Each message reinforced the rightness of my decision. The entitlement was so ingrained that Kevin could not even see it. He simply expected me to accommodate his needs, finance his move, and rearrange my life to solve his problems, all without question or complaint. Saturday morning was the day my tenants were scheduled to move in. I woke early with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had arranged to meet David at the duplex at 9 a.m. to oversee the move-in process and provide keys to both sets of tenants. Dr. Wilson would arrive at 9:30, and Michael and Lisa were scheduled for 11 o'clock. I dressed carefully in professional attire, wanting to present myself as a competent property owner. As I was about to leave my new apartment, my phone rang. It was my father. Gee, he said without preamble, your mother and I are heading to the duplex now. We thought we'd surprise you and bring breakfast. Kevin and Sarah are meeting us there with some boxes. My heart raced. They were going to arrive before me, before the tenants, before I had a chance to explain. The confrontation I had been dreading was about to happen in the worst possible way. "Actually, Dad, I'm not at the duplex," I managed to say. "I'm on my way there now to meet someone." "Perfect. We'll see you there," he replied cheerfully, hanging up before I could protest further. I immediately called David to warn him about the situation. He assured me he would handle it professionally and wait for my arrival before proceeding with the tenant move-ins. The drive to the duplex was the longest 20 minutes of my life. With each mile I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain my decision, and how I would stand firm in the face of what would surely be anger and disappointment from my family. As I turned onto the street, I could see my parents' car already parked in front of the duplex. Kevin's minivan was pulling up behind it. In my rearview mirror, I noticed a moving truck approaching from the opposite direction. Dr. Wilson was early. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. I parked my car behind Kevin's minivan and took a deep breath. Through the windshield, I could see my family standing on the sidewalk in front of the duplex, looking confused. David, in his Cornerstone Property Management polo shirt, was speaking with them, gesturing toward the property. As I exited my car, I heard my father saying, "There must be some mistake. This is my daughter's property. She bought it for our family." David noticed me approaching and gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement. "Mrs. Harper," he said, using my last name formally. "Your family was just explaining that they thought they would be moving in today." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Mom, Dad, Kevin, Sarah." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to explain something to you." My mother looked bewildered, clutching a bag from the local bakery. "Gee, what's going on? Who is this man? And why is there a moving truck coming?" The moving truck had indeed arrived and was now parking across the street. Dr. Wilson, a dignified woman in her 60s, emerged from her car, parked further down the block, and approached our group with a curious expression. Kevin, always quick to anger, stepped toward me. "What the hell, G? We were supposed to move in today. We gave notice at our apartment already." Before I could respond, David intervened smoothly. "Perhaps we should all step aside to allow Dr. Wilson to access her new home." He gestured toward the woman now standing at the edge of our group. "She has a scheduled move-in appointment, and her movers are waiting." "Her new home?" Sarah echoed, her voice rising. "What is he talking about, G?" All eyes turned to me. The moment I had been dreading and preparing for had arrived. I straightened my shoulders and spoke clearly. "I rented both units of the duplex to tenants. Dr. Wilson is moving into Unit A today, and another couple is moving into Unit B later this morning." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother gasped, my father's face darkened with anger, and Kevin stared at me in disbelief. David, sensing the tension, turned to Dr. Wilson. "Doctor, if you'll allow me a few minutes to resolve this family matter, I'll be right with you to complete your move-in process." She nodded understandingly and returned to her car to wait. "You did what?" my father finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I rented both units," I repeated. "I signed year-long leases with qualified tenants through Cornerstone Property Management." Kevin exploded. "Are you kidding me? We have nowhere to live, G. We gave notice. Where are we supposed to go in 2 weeks?" Sarah started to cry, turning away from the group and pulling out her phone, presumably to text someone about this development. My mother stepped forward and placed her hand on my arm. "Sweetheart, there must be some misunderstanding. We discussed this. Kevin and his family need that second unit. You know their situation." I gently removed her hand. "No, Mom. You discussed it. You all made plans for my property without asking me. You assumed I would just go along with it like I always do." My father interjected. "We thought you would want to help your brother. Family helps family, G. That's how we raised you." His words, meant to induce guilt, instead fueled my determination. Yes, family helps family, but it should go both ways. When has Kevin ever made sacrifices for me? When have any of you considered what I might need or want before making decisions that affect my life? Kevin scoffed. "Oh, here we go with the poor routine. You have a good job, no kids, no real responsibilities. Some of us have actual problems. His dismissal of my life and choices was the final straw. 6 years of saving, of denying myself luxuries and vacations, of working overtime and weekends to reach my goal of property ownership, all reduced to having no real responsibilities. Real responsibilities? I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Like financial responsibility? Because from where I'm standing, you've never shown any. You've borrowed money from me 3 times without repaying it. Mom and Dad have bailed you out countless times. And now you expected to live in my investment property rent-free, with no regard for how that would affect my mortgage payments or financial future. By now, Michael and Lisa had arrived for their move-in appointment and were watching our family drama unfold from their car. David discreetly went to speak with them, explaining the delay. My mother began to cry, and my father put his arm around her shoulders. "I never thought you'd be so selfish, G," he said, disappointment evident in his tone. "Your brother has children to think about." "I am not being selfish," I replied firmly. "I'm being realistic. This duplex is an investment that I worked hard for. I have a mortgage to pay. If Kevin and his family lived there rent-free, I'd be the one covering the entire cost. How is that fair?" Sarah rejoined the conversation, her expression hard. "We would have helped with utilities at least, and Kevin is looking for work. Once he finds something, we could have contributed." I shook my head. "That's not enough. And based on past experience, I don't believe it would have happened anyway. How long before 1 month turned into 6, and 6 into a year? How long before my investment became a financial burden instead of an asset?" Kevin turned to our parents. "Can you believe this? After everything we've done for her." That statement stunned me into momentary silence. Everything they'd done for me. My mind raced through years of being expected to babysit at a moment's notice, to loan money I never got back, to rearrange my schedule to accommodate Kevin's needs. "What exactly have you done for me, Kevin?" I asked quietly. "Name one time you've put my needs before your own. One time you've sacrificed anything for me." He faltered, unable to come up with an example. My father stepped in. "That's enough, G. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't how we raised you to behave. Family comes first." "Yes, family comes first," I agreed. "But I'm family too. And for years I've been expected to put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. Not anymore. So what are we supposed to do now?" Kevin demanded. "Where are we supposed to live?" "The same place you would live if I hadn't bought this duplex," I replied. "Find an apartment you can afford. Budget your money. Do what every other family has to do." Sarah scoffed. "Easy for you to say from your position of privilege." Her comment ignited a fresh wave of anger. "Privilege? I worked 60-hour weeks for years to save for this property. I packed lunches instead of eating out. I lived in a tiny apartment and drove an old car. I earned this through hard work and careful planning, not privilege." My mother, always the peacemaker, tried another approach. "Gee, sweetheart, maybe we can compromise. Perhaps Kevin could pay some rent, even if it's below market rate." I shook my head. "It's too late for that, Mom. I've signed binding leases with both tenants. They have legal rights to occupy those units for the next 12 months. You could break the leases," my father suggested. "Pay whatever penalty there is." The fact that he would suggest I take a financial hit to fix Kevin's problem perfectly illustrated the dynamic I was fighting against. "No," I said firmly. "I will not break legal contracts and risk my professional reputation because Kevin failed to plan properly. These tenants have rights, and I intend to honor my agreements with them." Kevin threw up his hands in disgust. "Unbelievable. So much for family loyalty." My mother was openly crying now. "I don't understand why you didn't just tell us your plans, G. Why keep it a secret if you weren't doing anything wrong?" Her question hit me hard. It was a fair point. Why hadn't I simply told them up front? "Because you never would have listened," I replied honestly. "You would have pressured me to change my mind, made me feel guilty, and probably would have worn me down eventually. You didn't even ask me before making plans for my property." You just assumed I would go along with what you wanted like I always do. David approached cautiously. Mrs. Harper, Dr. Wilson is ready to begin her move-in process, and Michael and Lisa are waiting as well. I nodded to him, grateful for the interruption. I need to attend to my tenants now, I told my family. We can continue this discussion later if you want, but my decision is final. My father's face was a mask of disappointment as he took my mother's arm. Let's go, Martha. Clearly G has made her choice. Kevin remained defiant. This isn't over, G. You can't just leave us homeless. You're not homeless, Kevin, I said, exhaustion creeping into my voice. You have 2 weeks to find a new place. Plenty of families manage it every day. Sarah grabbed his arm. Come on, Kevin. She obviously doesn't care about us or the children. Let's go. As they turned to leave, my mother looked back at me with tears in her eyes. I don't recognize you anymore, G. This isn't the daughter I raised. Her words stung, but I stood my ground as they all got into their vehicles and drove away. Only when they were out of sight did I allow my shoulders to slump and the tears to well in my eyes. David approached and handed me a tissue. That was tough, he said kindly. But for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. I wiped my eyes and straightened my posture. Thank you. Now, let's get Dr. Wilson moved into her new home. As we walked toward the duplex where Dr. Wilson was waiting patiently, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The confrontation had been every bit as painful as I had feared, but standing my ground had been necessary. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had put my own needs first. The fallout would be significant, but so would the growth that came from finally breaking unhealthy patterns. As I extended my hand to greet Dr. Wilson properly, I managed a genuine smile. This was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for my tenants but for me as well. The silence from my family was deafening in the days following the confrontation. My mother's daily texts ceased. My father's weekend calls to check in vanished. Even Kevin, who usually contacted me whenever he needed something, maintained radio silence. It was as if I had been excommunicated from the family for my act of self-preservation. The first week was the hardest. I would pick up my phone to call my mother, then set it down again, reminding myself that I had done nothing wrong. I had simply protected my investment and set a boundary that was long overdue. Still, 32 years of conditioning was difficult to overcome. The guilt weighed heavily, especially at night when I lay awake in my new apartment, wondering if I had been too harsh, too sudden in my approach. Taylor proved to be an invaluable support during this time. She came over with takeout and wine 3 days after the confrontation, letting me vent my complicated emotions. I keep second-guessing myself, I admitted, curled up on my new couch. Maybe I should have just let them have the duplex. Maybe I'm being selfish. Taylor looked at me incredulously. Gee, do you hear yourself? You worked for 6 years to save for that property. 6 years. And they expected to live there for free without even discussing it with you. How is protecting your investment selfish? But they are family, I said weakly, the argument sounding hollow even to my own ears. Yes, and family should support each other mutually, not just take and take and take, she replied firmly. When was the last time Kevin sacrificed anything for you? I couldn't think of a single example. Exactly, Taylor continued. This is a pattern that needed to be broken. And honestly, you did Kevin a favor in the long run. He needs to learn financial responsibility, not get another bailout. Deep down I knew she was right. My brother had never faced the consequences of his financial decisions because someone had always been there to rescue him, usually me or our parents. By refusing to be his safety net this time, I was forcing him to find his own solutions. The second week brought practical concerns that distracted me from the family drama. Both sets of tenants had settled in, and David from the property management company sent me detailed reports of the move-in inspections. There were minor maintenance issues to address: a leaky faucet in Unit A, a sticky door in Unit B. Dealing with these small problems gave me a sense of accomplishment and reinforced that I was capable of handling this investment property. The first rental checks arrived in my account, providing tangible validation of my decision. Seeing those deposits, knowing they would cover the majority of my mortgage payment, brought a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what I had worked toward all those years of saving and sacrificing. By the third week, the silence from my family became concerning rather than hurtful. I wondered how Kevin and Sarah were managing with their housing situation, whether they had found a new place before their lease expired. Despite our disagreement, I did care about them and especially about my niece and nephews. I finally broke down and texted my mother. Just checking in. Hope everyone is well. Her response came hours later, brief and formal. We're fine. Kevin and Sarah found an apartment, smaller than they wanted but affordable. The terseness of her message stung, but I was relieved to hear they had found housing. I responded, I'm glad to hear that. I miss you. She didn't reply. A month after the confrontation, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. The sight of her familiar handwriting on the envelope brought tears to my eyes before I even opened it. Inside was a 4-page letter, the first real communication since that day at the Duplex. My dearest G, she began. It has taken me some time to process what happened, and to try to understand your perspective. I want you to know that while I was hurt and disappointed by your decision, I have been reflecting on our family dynamics and my role in creating the situation. She went on to acknowledge that the family had often taken my generosity for granted and had developed expectations that were not fair to me. She admitted that Kevin had been allowed to rely too heavily on family support without developing his own responsibility. Your father and I had good intentions, she wrote. We wanted to help Kevin through a difficult time, but we should have asked you first, not assumed you would go along with our plan. That was wrong of us and I am sorry. Her apology brought fresh tears. It was more than I had expected and exactly what I needed to hear. She continued, Kevin and Sarah have found a 2-bedroom apartment across town. It's not ideal, but it's within their budget. The children are sharing a room, which has been an adjustment, but they are resilient. Kevin has found part-time work at a warehouse while he continues to look for something in his field. Sarah has picked up more hours teaching. They are managing, which I suppose is the important thing. The letter ended with a cautious olive branch. We would love to see you at Sunday dinner this week if you're willing. I can't promise there won't be tension, but I can promise that your father and I will make an effort to respect your boundaries. Kevin may need more time. Love always, Mom. I held the letter to my chest, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. The acknowledgement of my perspective and the apology for their presumption meant more than I could express. That Sunday, I drove to my parents' house with a mixture of anxiety and hope. When my mother opened the door, there was a moment of awkward hesitation before she pulled me into a tight hug. I've missed you, she whispered. I've missed you too, Mom, I replied, fighting back tears. Dinner was subdued compared to our usual family gatherings. Kevin, Sarah, and the children were not present, which was probably for the best. My father was reserved at first, but as the meal progressed, he began to thaw. By dessert, we were having something resembling a normal conversation. Before I left, my father took me aside. It was wrong of us to make plans for your property without consulting you, he admitted gruffly. You worked hard for that duplex. It's yours to do with as you choose. Coming from my father, this acknowledgement was significant. He had never been one to admit mistakes easily. Thank you, Dad, I said, giving him a hug. That means a lot to me. The road to complete reconciliation was longer with Kevin and Sarah. They declined the next several family dinners when they knew I would be present. When we finally did see each other at my nephew's birthday party 2 months later, the tension was palpable. Kevin was coolly polite. Sarah barely acknowledged me, but at least they were civil. The children, thankfully, were unchanged in their affection for their aunt. Sophie threw her arms around me when I arrived, and Liam eagerly showed me his science project. Even little Ethan wanted to sit on my lap during cake, a normality that helped ease the strained atmosphere. As months passed, family dynamics slowly shifted. My parents began to treat me with a new respect, consulting me about decisions rather than informing me after the fact. They stopped automatically volunteering my time and resources for family needs. It was a subtle but profound change that validated my decision to stand up for myself. Kevin and Sarah remained distant, but there were small signs of progress. Kevin sent me a text when he secured a full-time position at a local company, a small olive branch that I gratefully acknowledged with congratulations. Sarah included me in a group text about school fundraisers, a minor inclusion that nonetheless indicated a thawing of relations. Most surprisingly, my brother seemed to be developing a sense of financial responsibility that had previously been absent. According to my mother, he and Sarah had created a budget and were sticking to it. They had even started a small savings account, a first in their married life. 2 years after that fateful Saturday, I closed on my second investment property, a small single-family home in a neighboring town. As I stood on the porch, keys in hand, a familiar minivan pulled up to the curb. My heart did a little flip, but this time it wasn't from anxiety. Kevin got out, holding 2 paint rollers and a tray. "Heard you bought another place," he said with a genuine smile. "Figured you could use a hand with the painting." I was speechless. He walked up the steps and looked around. "You know," he said, "that day at the Duplex was the best-worst day of my life. You drew a line that I needed someone to draw a long time ago. It forced me to finally stand on my own 2 feet. He handed me a paint roller. "So this time let me help you build your dream the right way." We spent the whole weekend painting together, not as a needy brother and a resentful sister, but as 2 equals, as true family. We rebuilt more than just the walls of that house. We rebuilt our relationship on a new foundation of mutual respect and genuine support. It turns out that sometimes the strongest boundaries create the closest bonds. If this story about breaking cycles and rebuilding family on a foundation of respect resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about finding your strength. Thank you for listening.